Mr. Deck, if you'll follow me.
Okay.
I'll have you right here. Thank you so much for coming.
Go ahead and.
Dave, I think Mr. Deck is ready if you're all set.
Alan, thank you very much for coming in. I'm Dave Fulton.
Dave, pleasure.
Alan, when you were growing up, what was your favorite rock radio station in Indianapolis?
My favorite rock radio station was WLS in Chicago, Dave.
What about Indianapolis?
Indianapolis was an interesting situation. That turned into a real inside the cell, barbed wire, chainsaw death match between two real heavyweights. You had Wife AM and WNAP FM. WNAP was the first successful FM-only rock station in the United States. It would be a long and bloody battle between these two, and eventually both combatants would fall. But how we got there, well, you need to go back to the very beginning.
Rolling Stones, you got to roll me tumbling dice. Number 5 by your nap line request at WNAP.
Keep it on WILP and be listening for the good guys to call your telephone number. When they do, you call Contest Control at 005-1300 within 30 seconds and claim a lucky telephone jackpot of that hour.
Wish Wonderland, WISH, with music or music. Tune in to Richard Top Tunes. Just the best will do. On radio, Indianapolis, WIBC.
In the 50s, you didn't have formatted radio. I would play big band music, symphony music, interview-type talk shows. It was supposed to be a radio station for everybody.
Back in the 50s, there was very little on the FM dial. Very few people had FM radios, so they put all the money into the AM station.
The friendly voice of Indiana, WIBC.
On a day like today.
WIBC went live to under the marquee of the Circle Theater in downtown Indianapolis for the Pick a Pocket show with the late Jim Shelton.
Jim Shelton did a lot of man on the street. He had a show called Pick a Pocket, in which people put their hand into his apron and pulled out a prize anywhere up to potentially $50.
We have a vest that we wear with 15 pockets, and they're all mixed up, the numbers on the pockets, and it's the only legal place in town that you can pick a pocket.
And at 7 o'clock, Jim Shelton would come on with a program called Platter Party, because back in those days, records were referred to as platters. And then when he went off at 9 o'clock, Dick Summer had a show called Summertime. And Dick Summer would do his show from a little studio on top of a drive-in that was reminiscent of Mel's drive-in in American Graffiti.
And so we're going to have to scoot out of here. Thanks an awful lot for catching the Summertime show. This is Dick Summer. Very sincerely yours.
It was a fun time. It really was.
And the DJ was the strongest voice on the air. The DJ actually made the station profit because he was the guy or she was the girl who played the record, did the commercials, and brought the listeners in through their personalities.
We're going to rock around the clock tonight.
And then you started hearing Elvis and some of the other ones I remember. Oh, Bill Haley and the Comets, Rock Around the Clock.
Hello, baby.
Here comes this music, rock and roll.
Suddenly radio had something to embrace as a new format and to, again, reinvent itself.
Rock and roll was a mixture of rhythm and blues and white kids. Being that age, there's no way you couldn't be affected by it.
You would hear other music, let's say, it just didn't get your juices flowing. But the thing about rock and roll was, man, it just made you want to get up and move, and it was just exciting to listen to, and it was just so much more fun than the kind of music that was going on.
It had a beat and an excitement about it that was totally different from the big band era that was just beginning to fade out. It was just something so new and different, and it caught what people liked in terms of rhythm and beat.
Rock and roll was rebellion because it broke a lot of the stereotype molds. It had an energy and a vitality and a life that was almost its own.
In the late 1950s, Bouncin' Bill Baker owned radio in Indianapolis. He was the morning man at WIBC, and that was owned by Fairbanks Broadcasting. Well, the other stations just couldn't compete. We're talking about WIRE, WXLW, WISH, FBM. Bouncin' Bill just owned the market.
I remember Bouncin' Bill Baker, their morning host, used to say, "Bouncin' Bill, your early morning vitamin pill, down here in the snake pit."
Once again, here he is, the original adult delinquent, the one and only Bouncin' Bill Baker.
Well, there you are, and good morning, music lovers. You look absolutely this morning. Yours truly, the Big B, Bouncin' Bill B, here on WIBC, clipping across the kilocycles, mutilating the megacycles. Here's Diane Renee, our chick of the day, and number 11, Navy Blue.
I think Bouncin' Bill Baker was the rock and roll disc jockey of that era. He was very immensely popular with his show, but he was playing early rock and roll, and that's what Bouncin' Bill Baker did.
On our ever-popular production here of Baker & Company on WIBC Radio, that is WIBC.
Yes, your show is very popular at bar mitzvahs, disasters at sea, pressure cooker openings, and rhubarb festivals.
Thank you very much for our sake. Frankly, for that you can take one giant step out the window.
This was a totally different time in radio. All the DJs had theme songs. They had names for their shows, like it was Toasting Coffee with Bouncin' Bill Baker in the morning.
Music on record and weather, news and time.
Back when Elvis was big, my dad actually talked to Elvis himself on several occasions. He knew that my dad was one of the big jocks that had played the record first, and in some cases may have been the first to play it.
Bright and early next morning, he brought my letter.
WIBC, the mighty 1070.
In the late 50s, early 60s, if you wanted to hear the hits in Indianapolis, there were two places on the dial, 1070 WIBC, 1310 WISH.
So wherever you are, home or in your car, here's wonderful wish for you.
On Wonderful 131, it's the Tom Mathis Show swinging along on the portable sounds of WISH. The time is 23 before 8 on the Wish Watch on the wall, 64 degrees now in Wishland. WISH Instant News at 2 before the hour. We call this one number 18 this week on our terrific Top 31 survey of sounds here in the Circle City. Ben E. King does the wish warbling, and he wants you to stand by him for moral support, or some kind of support, maybe financial support.
But in the late fall, 1963, that's when that all ground to a halt. That's when Wife hit.
Indianapolis, WIFE loves you.
WIFE's brand of successful marketing, successful music, successful imaging came at the expense of only one broadcaster, WIBC and Fairbanks Broadcasting. The audience shifted from 1070 to 1310, and it didn't happen overnight. It took about a week.
Wish had been bought by a guy named Don Burden, who owned a couple of stations out west.
When Don Burden flipped the switch,
on WIFE AM, it was like a breath of fresh air. It attracted teens, and a lot of our clients said that's all you have is teens because you play rock and roll.
WIFE was the first true rock and roll radio station. So it's that music that we generated every day might have been played in bits and pieces on other radio stations, but no one had a format that was totally rock radio.
And they played the hits and nothing but the hits, so help you, that's the hits. That's what they did, and they were the king.
It wasn't just the music, it's what the station was all about, and that was promotions, contests, everything. And older people, they wanted to be involved, you know, and you never knew what WIFE was going to do.
Hey, how'd you like to win a beautiful 1968 Chevelle station wagon from the Roger W. Morgan Show? Well, all you have to do is hit your wagon to the Morgan machine tomorrow morning and find out what the keyword is. Get up and go with that Roger W. Morgan Show tomorrow morning for sure, huh? All right, get back to work, man.
The thing about WIFE, when they first hit the air, that's so amazing, is the signal was not all that great, but they came on very, very strong with lots of exciting personalities, lots of energy, lots of contests, lots of giveaways, and a sound that this town had not heard. For a radio station with 5,000 watts and a marginal signal to knock off 50,000 watt WIBC that had been kingpin for so long.
What was originally WISH AM, which may have had a 3 share of the market, probably went to a 20 share overnight with Wife. I mean, they absolutely destroyed WIBC. Wife was so big, it's hard to believe how big it was. A tornado wouldn't have that big an impact on a community today.
You know, every city was known by a radio station that was there. And I think Indianapolis was known by Wife and the Picture Window Studios there.
Everything was bigger than life. Everything we did was done to be bigger than life.
You gotta remember one thing, when we say hit radio, we have to define the eras that we're talking about.
We had some really great music going on in America. We had rhythm and blues. We had a new kind of country coming along. We had rock and roll. But a couple of things happened. Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper, they all died when the airplane crashed the day the music died. John F. Kennedy was assassinated. It was a bummer. People were really unhappy. About that time, these young guys from Liverpool came over and made us feel good again.
Wife hit at the end of '63. The Beatles hit 90 days after they went on the air. And that changed everything.
The British invasion was, I think in many ways, it was much bigger than people even acknowledge today. It changed our whole culture. The Beatles really assimilated all the different types of music. They grew up listening to all the black records. So did the Rolling Stones. If you go back and look at all the Rolling Stones stuff, all the early stuff that they recorded, they were all black blues songs.
I think the fact that Wife hit the air about the time of the British invasion probably helped them a great deal. WIFE knew how to package it and present it in a more exciting way.
I think WIFE just rode a crest. I mean, where they were just, they were big and they came in just guns a-blazing. And I think it happened so quickly that WIBC probably didn't even see that come about. I mean, WIFE brought the Beatles here.
On behalf of all of the State Fair Board and all the good guys from WIFE, may I present the Beatles!
WIFE sponsored the Beatles show at the Coliseum that summer, and when the promoters sold out the show, they added a second show outside at the grandstand, and WIBC got the sponsorship of that. They knew they had to be in the game to compete.
I mean, everything fell apart quick at WIBC. And they tried to change, you know, because all of a sudden they became my second favorite radio station, and I listened to them for a while, but the whole station didn't have the same persona as WIFE. They had this guy that looked like, acted like James Bond in the morning, and they had a girl in a gold bikini dancing in the window.
In fairness to Mr. Fairbanks, he did respond. He just didn't respond properly. He just didn't do it right, and that's okay. I don't have any nail prints in my hand. He didn't either. He made some mistakes. He tried to bring in, he brought in several managers. He brought in several programmers. He brought in different staffs. He tried several things. He worked at it. He just didn't have the right formula, I think.
When WIFE came to town, my father was concerned. I think he realized that now they were playing a different game. It wasn't just all about entertainment. It wasn't just, okay, the listener's going to tune in automatically. Now they have a chance to win money, have a chance to win all kinds of prizes, all kinds of other things that IBC was not doing at that point in time.
Ratings are the most important thing in radio, and jingles can help aid in getting the ratings simply by burning into a person's mind a certain melody and or a certain phrase about a radio station.
Indianapolis, our Indianapolis.
WIFE had probably some of the best jingles this town's ever heard, which really transitioned things nicely.
Be where the fun is, get with the good guys, and always leave it at Lucky 13.
The pacing was very tight, very clean. Not a lot of extra words were used. They actually speeded up their records so they could get more music in. The disc jockeys had lots of energy.
My favorite DJ became Jay Reynolds. The Jaybird in the Catbird seat every afternoon, 3 to 7 on WIFE. He was absolutely incredible.
Well, the Jay Reynolds Show is you kind of get up out of those chairs behind those desks and get out of that car and get away homeward bound. Lucky 13 Radio will keep you informed of all the traffic information with Lieutenant Tom Barlow and informed with all the great music. And there's $300 right now in that lucky telephone jackpot waiting for possibly your phone number to be called.
The personalities of the radio station in the 60s, I think, could be compared to today's rock stars. They were highly talented performers who not only played the records, but they bantered back and forth with the audience. They had call-ins. I mean, it was quite a show.
The WIFE good guys say,
Have a happy holiday, free and easy, that's the way. Have a happy holiday.
You're sounding good, you're sounding bright, and let me tell you the happy holiday activities that are lined up today in the 500 Festival as the big weekend continues.
When you're back there in a small town, the wife good guys were the equivalent of Tom Cruise. It's like you're never going to see a big star. This is the biggest stars of your world.
Be a WIFE listener, not a WIFE statistic. Slow down and live.
Number 4 from the 4 Tops, it's about the same old song.
WIFE and the beat goes on and on and on and on, on and on and on and on, on and on and on.
Don Burden was the owner of Star Stations, a young man who came out of Idaho as a salesman and a go-getter, an alpha male. He was a millionaire by his mid-20s, and he was an irascible personality. He was difficult to like. He was very intimidating, but he was one heck of a businessman.
Don Burden was the kind of a guy that never wanted to lose. He had an attitude like Vince Lombardi, win, win, win at all times. I'm not sure the guy ever slept, because he'd jump on a plane and go to a station in Omaha, Portland, so forth and so on. And then he'd be back in town in 2 or 3 days.
Don Burden was a slightly built, wiry dynamo of a person. When he walked into the room, you knew that he was in the room.
He was a marketing guru. He was high energy, could be explosive, but he also was a taskmaster. For example, we had a sales meeting every morning at 8. We had a sales meeting every night at 5, and we had a sales meeting every Saturday morning at 9.
Don Burden called me, and it was never, this is Mr. B, this is Don Burden, this is Mr. Burden. It was always, and in a very hushed tone, Roger, it's me. Even when I say that today, my hands start to shake and my heart beats faster.
And so at times, he could be sort of difficult if you would like go to a restaurant. He would move us maybe 5 times till he got the table he wanted, and all of us would troop behind him and be very embarrassed. But he wanted the best all the time, and because of that, most of the time he got it from the people that worked for him.
Don Burden was a man of immediate instincts. If he was angry, he was as angry as he could possibly be instantly. If he was treating you good, if he was treating you well, that was instantaneous. I could walk down the hallway. If I'd done something good for Don that day, he'd stick his hand out to shake my hand. When I pulled my hand away, there'd be a $100 bill in there. And back in the early 60s, let me tell you, $100 bill meant a lot.
Don Burden was not a person that the air staff saw very often, but when you did see him, it was memorable.
Now, one of his little idiosyncrasies that I don't know whether you've heard about or not, was he learned a trick, and it was a great trick. The trick was to display his anger in a most profound way. Don Burden would take a plastic ruler, slap it on the edge of the table. The end of that ruler would break off, and if he did it just exactly right, it would stick in the ceiling. And that was a perfect performance so far as Don Burden was concerned.
One time he came up to the studio, and the FM operators were supposed to be answering the request lines for the AM station because they didn't have a lot to do. They just changed the reels of tape. One time he saw they weren't being answered, he ripped the phone out of the wall, smashed it against the wall, and said, "Next time, answer the phones." Well, of course, they couldn't answer the phones because the phone was ripped out of the wall.
Burden taught me how to A, work hard, B, it didn't matter until we got the job done. He didn't care if you worked till 5, 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, but he rewarded us well.
There were times where Don insisted that we talk to a particular client, and our suggested budget for that client was very high. And the client would say, "Oh my God, I never spent that much in radio in 2 years." You know, and he said, "Well, this is the way you do it to be successful." When we were able to convince those people to do it and use the proper amount of dollars, they were successful.
Favorite wife, WIFE.
And that was kind of a cool thing to be known as wife, WIFE, where the call letters stood for something. WIFE, your wife. You know, we're tuned to your wife day and night, you know, whatever. I mean, that was a cool thing.
They took advantage of every opportunity to embed their call letters, which obviously were unique call letters, and their place on the dial in people's minds. Well, when you said you're lucky 13, they knew that, and they oriented the 13 to where it must be on the dial. So everything, the jingles were lucky 13. The contests were lucky 13. You had 13 prizes. You had things hidden at 13 locations. If anything could be oriented to the number 13, it was, because that's where WIFE was on the dial, 1310.
Color yourself lucky at WIFE. The Good Guys are celebrating Lucky 13's all-colorful programming with Fall Funorama.
Lucky because we had contesting going on. You could win color television sets, and color television sets back then was, oh my goodness, you know, nobody had them. And we gave away 113 color TV sets.
The request line was 13, you know, it was 1300, you know, when you dial into it, 13 cars, 13, you know, it was anything, because that was just the hip way to tie it all together. That's what the program directors did.
Well, the deal was to get more people listening to our station, and to do that, we had to give away things, I thought. And we gave away a lot of things, homes and cars, and we weren't paying for it, you know.
We had a dream home promotion. Before dream homes were probably in fashion, and I have to smile when I think of the dream home. It was built by Ryland Homes. It was totally furnished by Kittle's Furniture. And we had an on-air contest that ran for 4 weeks or whatever the number of weeks it was. We drew out of a hat one winner and did a remote live at the home when we gave it away, and one couple won a totally furnished dream home lock, stock, and barrel. That was huge, huge.
Don Burden had a theory, and his theory was to be heavily involved in the community, to do things for people so that they knew that if they had a friend in WIFE. For example, the Easter egg hunt. We had thousands and thousands of mothers and little kids out there trying to pick up records and eggs and so forth and so on.
There's one promotion that Wife had that everyone in Indianapolis remembers. It was a billboard out by the airport.
And when you went by it and you saw it, I remember the logo, the big wife logo, and it said, "While you've been gone, we've been spending night and day with your wife." And we used to get more feedback from that than you can imagine.
WIFE, WIFE, home of the good guys, home of the good guys, that's what.
In 1957, Lee Bartell, who owned KCBQ and, of course, Bartell Broadcasting, he had an idea of having picture window studios where you could drive by and see the disc jockey play the hits in the window.
The window on the world was a large glass window in front of the air studio at WIFE, which was on North Meridian Street in the old Riddick Piano Building, which is where Wish TV and Wish Radio was once located until it became WIFE. Well, now you had this modern-looking control room, and you could see the disc jockeys that you heard on the radio actually performing.
But we had a few incidences in Window on the World. There were a couple of bullet holes in the window over a period of years. Nobody got hurt, fortunately. We had any number of moonings on the Window on the World. And then, of course, Tom Mathis, the all-night guy, who became very close friends with the police department in exchange for donuts.
It would be crowded out there with females. And eventually some of the females would make it inside.
When the relationship between the guy in the studio behind the Window on the World and the shapely young thing on the other side of the window became so good that we could actually extend an invitation perhaps late at night for her to venture into our side of the Window on the World, then the Window on the World became something that we really wished we could do away with. There was no shade on the Window on the World.
The ratings were phenomenal, just phenomenal. They were so high that they were unbelievable.
During the 60s, when WIFE was the dominant station, the competition was basically zero. The Emperor, Joe Light, who was quite a personality, was on the air from 7 till midnight. And at one point in that period of time, he had 99% of the audience at night. During the rest of the air shifts, if we didn't have more than 40% of the audience, and preferably 50 to 60% of the audience, our jobs might have been in jeopardy.
I think the feeling of having pressure on you at all times gets tiresome. And we had guys that lasted less than a week.
What made Wife different from the other stations was the format. Everything was regulated to play certain music at certain times. They had what they called a radio clock.
And they just pounded the music, plus they pounded the jingles, plus they always had a contest running. They always had something that they were going to give away, or your chance to win, $1,000, or they had a guy called the Big Kahuna, and they were doing remote broadcasts. Now, this was something that was really unusual, that rock and roll radio stations would go out and do a remote, and they would draw hundreds of people. And Wife was just, I'd say, 10 years ahead of any other station in this city.
My newscasts at Wife were probably faster and shorter because they were faster.
Let's check right now with mobile unit number 1 and Bill Vanilla.
Well, Jay, the news is not good. We've had too many accidents out here, and we're at the present time on the scene of one in the 6400 block of East 30th Street, which resulted in minor back injuries to 22-year-old Robert Sample of 7238 Kensington.
We had a guy in the morning called Roger W. Morgan who did Morganizing. He'd call and Morganize you.
Well, Span can help you.
Hi, Pat. Lily Quinlan calling. I just got my driver's license. I'm so excited.
Okay.
I'm 84. Could I get a flag made for the car?
What do you want put on it?
I'd like it to be like a black flag of some sort, maybe. Big enough for other motorists to see, with the words back off on it.
What kind of size of flag do you want? 12 by 18 inch, or?
Oh, I think it should be more like 5 feet by 9 feet.
No, you can't do that.
Why?
Because when you weren't moving,
yes,
it's going to hang 14 feet down.
Well, let's make the pole 9 feet high.
But I think that's too big.
Before I do that, right down at the bottom underneath, let's see, we'd have back off, and then right down underneath that, could we get another short line? You've just been Morganized?
You've just been Morganized?
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
It's Roger W. Morgan.
I was thinking you're nuts.
Well, Roger W. Morgan started on the West Coast, a personality. Burden picked up on it, created our own Roger W. Morgan in Omaha and in Indianapolis. That's the kind of guy he was. If he saw something, heard something, thought it made sense, and was exciting and different, he went for it.
Saluting the WIFE Businessman of the Day.
That's Garnet W. Lunsford, branch manager of Chrysler Corporation Air Temp Division. Mr. Lunsford attended Georgia Tech.
We did a WIFE Good Guy Businessman of the Day. And we would salute a business person within the community every hour on the hour from early morning throughout the course of each day.
And it was up to us salespeople to go out into the community and find a person who is active, a person who's got a responsible job.
It had one primary purpose, and that was to convince reluctant advertisers that there was power in radio. Because the moment somebody became Businessman of the Day, his phone rang off the wall.
I put a guy by the name of George Prescott on. He was with Galleons. 6 months, 8 months later, he died. And he was laid out at Flanner Buchanan, and I thought, oh man, I'll go pay my respects. So I go up to the casket. Casket is closed, and there are two things on the casket. His coffee cup and the WIFE Businessman of the Day plaque. That proves how much these people in the community were attracted to the station.
The biggest competitor that WIFE radio had in those days, as far as having the ability to maybe go after us format-wise, was Fairbanks Broadcasting, which was WIBC, which was a powerhouse. And we took all that rock audience away from them and just soared with it.
Fairbanks Broadcasting was owned exclusively by Richard Fairbanks, the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt's Vice President Charles Warren Fairbanks, for whom Fairbanks, Alaska was named. Dick was a fiercely proud radio magnate, operating 20 radio stations, a television station in Atlanta, and numerous cable television systems. He was a journalist, his family owning the Indianapolis News for some 50 years. Mr. Fairbanks had Jim Hilliard on his way to Indianapolis. He had made the hire. Jim had been a disc jockey here in town and program director at WIBC.
The real money in the market was on two stations. It was a WFBM, and the other one was WIFE when I came back. And I said, Mr. Fairbanks, we can't attack one, we have to attack them both. If you're going to get into a war, you're going to get dirty, so let's go get dirty.
FM was gaining some strength out in the West Coast as a viable format, as a viable medium. But in Indianapolis, WIBC FM was a classical music station, and it was run on 24-hour tapes. One large reel of tape, and it would go real slow, and nobody paid any attention to it. And either one of the engineers had forgotten or the tape broke, I'm not sure. But it had probably been off the air for 8, 10, maybe 12 hours, and nobody received a call. So they knew there wasn't anybody listening, and they knew they wanted to do something with it.
I just felt strongly that contemporary on FM would work.
What they did was they counter-programmed in the late 60s against WIFE AM at 1310 with NAP on their FM. Their signal power was far superior, clarity of sound far superior, high fidelity, which we didn't have on WIFE on the AM.
It was AM versus FM. Game on.
We were put on the air to protect WIBC from WIFE, and we did it. We pulled all the young audience away from WIFE, and that allowed WIBC to garner their older audiences and build on that.
You know, teenage girls had mothers, and mothers of teenage girls like what their teenage girls like. So what we had to do was get those teens away from WIFE, the older teens, you know. We needed those 17-year-olds.
If you really look at this as sort of conventional warfare, you've sort of looked at IBC flanking WIFE on the upper end for adults, and you had NAP sort of flanking it on the lower end with sort of cool kids. And so this was sort of the Fairbanks Empire's fight against WIFE, which was still the dominant radio station here for probably at least a decade, probably more. And NAP was sort of the cool station that was, you know, in those days, underground rock. You know, play what the disc jockey feels like playing.
The problem with FM was not that they weren't good and the signal wasn't better than AM and everything else, it's just there weren't enough receivers out there. And you got to have the receivers so people can listen to it so they can put it in the rating book.
FM radio was something that people might listen to in their home on a sort of a console set or a special radio. But most of the radios that people of my generation were listening to were either in automobiles or they were transistor radios that they had in their bedrooms or they would take with them for outside activity. And in those days, all it was AM.
People didn't have FM radios in their cars, and so AM continued to do very well for quite some time.
If you wanted to be FM, that was really cool, but that cost a lot more to have an AM/FM radio in your car, or had to be put in separate. So what we would do is get an FM converter and convert over, you know, from AM to FM, and that was real popular for a while back in the 60s.
At NAP, one of our first promotions was really unique. We decided to give away a bunch of little cheap FM radios that could only get 93.1.
People want to have what's cool. And what was cool in the late 60s was FM, because it was playing the music nobody else would touch. You got to remember that's when underground radio was coming on, progressive rock radio. All the protest songs, the Vietnam War was raging on. There were all these songs, anti-establishment type songs and what have you.
Radio in the 60s and the music of the 60s not only identified some of the social ills that were taking place in the country, but they were melodically answering, you know, some of the questions and the problems, you know, through song.
The world was changing, and we played the music that reflected those changes. And I think that's where, I mean, if you want to refer to WIFE or IBC or other stations in the market, it was the same all over the world. The people who had been current or in vogue, many of them got buried because they didn't change.
WIFE rode the crest of the wave of the British invasion. 5 years later, NAP comes along, and they ride the counterculture movement, playing long album cuts.
That generated a whole new thought to the young radio listener. And when they realized they could hear it much better, they started switching in droves.
Jim Hansen and I had just come out from IU to student teach in Indianapolis, and we were working at WIFE as nighttime and overnight news guys. And I got a call to go see the general manager at WIBC. And he hired us on the spot to take over the FM station and turn it into this real modern, hip rock station on FM.
WNAP came on the air in July of '68. Did we recognize that? Yeah, we did. We didn't know what kind of an impact that would have.
for the first 3 or 4 months, I don't know what Wife did. I don't think they were overly concerned. I think probably the best thing we did was put those kids on the air, because even though they were good, I don't think they frightened them, because they were so disjointed. It was not a well-packaged product. May I say that without insulting anybody?
The very first thing we did was play the national anthem. And it was the same old scratchy national anthem record by the Air Force Band that I'd played all my life in Sturgis, Michigan, or anywhere else.
Good morning. This is WNAP, Indianapolis, Indiana, owned by Fairbanks Broadcasting Company, Incorporated, and operating at 93.1 megahertz. WNAP serves Indianapolis and Central Indiana with studios at 2835 North Illinois Street and transmitter and tower atop the Emergence National Bank and Trust Company building in downtown Indianapolis.
Music loving, John Gillis, WNAP.
Good morning, early riser, and welcome to the Gillis Thing to Do on Music Power Radio, WNAP.
First record we ever played was a song called I Am the Muffin Man by the World of Oz. But they got played because our sales manager, Howard Brown, really liked the song, and it was on our playlist, and we figured we knew he'd be listening because he was a sales manager, and we doubted if anybody else would be up at that time.
From the very first minute we signed on, the phones lit up and never stopped blinking from that day forward.
Music power is what's happening. Music power is now. Music power is yours free from the big 93 WNAP.
The studio was kind of austere when we first started out. It was pretty bare bones and whatever they could throw together that the engineers weren't using on WIBC. The turntables were huge, and you had to queue up your records and do that, and it's nothing like it is today, not in the least. You know, having somebody come in and their coat drag across the tracking arm for the turntable, I always had to fix that. I always had to make some excuse for that. Starting the records off at the wrong speed, and not listening, turning the record on and going, okay, I'm going down the hall, get a coffee, get something, and the record's going at the wrong speed.
But we did have a little reverb on the mic, and it was probably a Radio Shack reverberation unit, which was a spring in a tin box. And some bright person, probably we can't help, put it in place right where your knee would go when you turned to cue up a record. And I think it was wired so that there was still reverb on the signal even if the mic was off. So you got your mic off and you're turning to cue up a record and you hit it with your knee and you get on the air. That got moved.
93 WNAP. 1210 NAP, most music time at the Al Stone Show with Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones, talking about a street-fighting man. 67 degrees in Naptown.
They created a strong array of disc jockeys, just like we had at Wife. And what they did was, you know what? They sat back and they listened, and they knew they were getting their brains beat out, but they were smart, and they paid attention, and they counter-programmed, and they came right at us.
At WNAP, they found 5 or 6 guys that had worked together, many of us in college. A couple of us had actually been on commercial radio before. And we were all available. And we came together and we clicked. We liked each other. We loved what we were doing. We were too young and stupid to know that it couldn't be done.
I believe very strongly in personalities. And we loaded up WNAP with the best personalities we could possibly do, but they have to match the audience. And if you start with the content, or if you look at who your customer is, too many people think it's the business client. And I love business clients, but I love my listeners more. If I have the listeners, I can find the business. If I find the business but I can't get the listeners, you've got nothing.
Al Stone and Jim Hansen were co-program directors. And Al was very easygoing, just laid-back personality. He knew the format, and he was right on the money all the time.
Working with me was Jim Hansen, Rick Reinhardt, Big John Gillis, and of course, Chris Connor.
The personalities, I think, were talked to you in a different way than the ones on WIFE did at the time. They were focused on the kids, the young kids. And I think that the jocks on NAP were talking to you in a different genre. It was a lot more hip, it was a lot more cool.
WIFE's personalities were kind of, to the public, bigger than life. We were really a part of an entity. It didn't emphasize the disc jockeys individually, but as a collective group, we were superstars. With WNAP, it was more personalities who were on the edge, personalities who pushed the envelope, personalities where you might say, oh my God, did he say that? They were probably more like bad boys, where we were the wife good guys.
At WIBC and WNAP, you had WIBC as a middle-of-the-road conservative radio station catering to the adult community.
Obla-doo, obla-da, Beatles song with the Anita Kerr Company. It's 10 before 11 o'clock, and my friend Bruce Taylor has the news at 11 this morning. Listen to these words.
And in the back room, you had this left-wing, many of the sponsors called us communists, wouldn't advertise at all with us.
WNAP 746, Michael T. John Griffin, laying them on you, baby. Cathedral, we're with you. The whole town is going up, and we're going to bring it home, right? Do it!
Let's put it this way. The relationship between the staffs was somewhat strained. You know, you got your younger guys who were into rock and roll and hippie types and all of that. And then you had your more straight guys who were real serious about everything. The Gary Todds and the Fred Heckmans. He used to refer to WNAP as the tinker toy in the back.
Everybody had to come in through the same door. The front of the building was Fred Heckman's property. And people who remember Fred Heckman know that he was no BS. He was hardcore conservative, and he would rather knock you out if you came in with hair below your ears.
WIBC was a very political station in a lot of ways. Great news. I mean, they were the news. But if you wanted to party, if you wanted to blow it out, you had to put it on 93.1. There was no other station doing that. And every time you turned us on, you didn't know what you were going to get. Very good programming idea.
We were rebels. Anything that WIFE did, we would do our best to do the opposite, and therefore look more dangerous to the youth.
At that particular point, Wife was considered to be bubblegum.
Yummy, 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 I got love in my tummy, and silly as it may seem.
And teeny bopper, or whatever you want to call it at the time. NAP had gone off and started doing more of the album type music, and it was more and more rock and roll, not so much of the young teen stuff.
We're off and running to WNAP in Indianapolis, Indiana to talk with the program director, Al Stone. Al, what's going on the musical picture out there?
Oh, there's all sorts of things going on out here, Jerry. We have quite an influx of the new underground sound coming to Naptown, as we refer to the big city of Indianapolis.
You mentioned Naptown. What does that mean?
Well, Naptown is a term that has been used for Indianapolis. We've taken it, as you notice, our call letters are NAP.
Right.
And we've taken the term Naptown and tried to give it a new twist. In other words, Naptown is no longer the sleeping baby child of the past.
Well, what are you doing for the action and things happening?
We're playing much more music, and we have lots and lots of fast-moving records from all over the country coming in every day, and we break them as fast as we get them. And we're trying concerts and things like that in the very near future to sort of educate the audience at the same time.
The music was different. The ethics were different. The teen voice was heard more. People broke rules.
The Free Mind Weekend was typical for NAP. Occasionally we'd take a whole weekend and play nothing but obscure album cuts and long songs that you'd never hear on AM.
When WIFE decided to slammed the door on the Doors. Jim Morrison had made some lewd appearance somewhere. And so WIFE made a statement by saying, we'll no longer play the Doors. We played them every hour.
Sometime in 1969, NAP finally went 24 hours a day, so we didn't have that 4-hour off-air time every day. But a little bit later, we took advantage of a new innovation that you could only do on FM.
WNAP is reborn. Stereo rock at the dawn of the 70s. WNAP is reborn. Stereo rock at the dawn of the 70s. Stereo rock at the dawn of the 70s. Stereo rock at the dawn of the 70s.
In 70, we went stereo, and that was really cool.
Well, for us, being inside the studio going stereo was, oh man, this is great music. This is greater than it was before. It's coming out of both speakers. And we did a remake on the studio, and we started using cartridges.
And cart machines were a great invention, but in essence, you could record a song on a cartridge, and you could plug it into a machine, and it would be queued up and ready to go. And you could talk in da-da-da-da, 313, bam, hit the button, it would come in with the first note of the song. So you could sequence things, you could time things. And a lot of what we did was tempo and pacing and flow, and we screamed and yelled for bigger speaker monitors so we could make it really loud. And when it got to the point that they could hear it all over the building, they screamed and yelled about smaller amplifiers and turning it down.
At the same time that Fairbanks was launching WNAP, Indianapolis had a rock and roll pirate radio station. It was on the AM band.
Jeff Beck comes in heavy, real heavy. Morning Dew from his Truth album, exclusively on Radio Free Naptown.
Radio Free Naptown was a bootleg radio station operating at odd times that was providing an alternative, both musically and culturally, that didn't exist at that point in time in Indianapolis.
Radio Free Naptown was the most notorious illegal bootleg radio station in the country.
A bootleg radio station is one that is unlicensed because licensing requirements were very strict at that point.
Radio Free Naptown, the Heavy 11, WRFN, Indianapolis.
The Heavy 11, the station where you get high on the music.
Our bootleg stations were a reaction to a lack of programming on current radio at that time in Indianapolis.
WIFE was a terrible radio station because all you heard were these smiling voices. You didn't hear a lot of musical variety. There was a very, very limited playlist. And contests are great, but as a listener, they become an annoyance.
At WIFE, all the guys were pukers. A puker is a guy who talks like this all the time because he sounds like he's about ready to throw up. That's pretty much a puker.
You're a Naptown head when you tune the sound of 1170 in on your radio dial. And we have got a smiling guy over here by the mic in his tux. How are things on Meridian Street?
Good afternoon, old buddy. Where's your window around here?
Window? What's well, why do we need a window?
You won't get any listeners that way, son. You gotta sit in your tuxedo at the window, and you gotta talk. All the cars going by, and right, they look at you, and it's just wonderful.
We punked WIFE as a bootleg radio station in the winter of '67. Our station was called WQRK at the time. We got up there at midnight to the WIFE marquee, took down all their signage and put up WQRK plays most music. And that punking of WIFE was pretty funny at the time at midnight. I went back the next afternoon at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What's the marquee say? WQRK plays most music.
This is Radio Free Naptown, the underground power in central Indiana.
And we played what we wanted, you know, stuff that we didn't hear on other radio stations.
As we started to play these cuts, we opened up what we called a phone request line. We'd send somebody to a phone booth. There were phone booths at that point in time, and give out the number, and people would call. And that person would write down request and drive back to the station, and we'd have a request list.
Sorry about this, but the phone lines are now closed. Terrible, but we're freezing to death in certain areas. Response has been enormous. I can't believe it on a night like this. A lot of calls and a lot of requests, and we're digging frantically for them right now.
This was not, you know, a record player and a handheld microphone. I mean, this was broadcast quality equipment because that was what they were used to working with. Over time, there became the knowledge that there were people in Indianapolis that were looking to have the FCC come in and shut down the station.
In March of 1972, the Federal Communications Commission, the FBI, and the Indianapolis Police Department raided the radio station.
When they got busted, they actually had the transmitter down at 38th, near 38th in Pennsylvania. And it was a mailman who actually was the snitch.
In a historic perspective of Radio Free Naptown, I think the station did something in the city that wasn't being done. We tried to do it well, and in the end, I think we were proud of what we did. Even though it was illegal, even though it was a bootleg radio station, it was something that was different.
In the early 70s, NAP and WIFE weren't broadcasting in a vacuum. Other stations in the market were listening, paying attention, and they were gaining some traction. They wanted their piece of the action.
In January of 1968, a group of businessmen and political personalities in our community got together and put on the FM band, a station called WTLC, With Tender Loving Care. I remember when I first heard the station, I just got so excited I couldn't believe it, because it was a consistent 24-hour diet of great, as a matter of fact, the great 48 black records in the country.
When WTLC signed on in January of 1968, they were able to lure Tom Mathis, who was a very popular WIFE good guy, to WTLC as the station's first general manager. And he brought with him all the knowledge that he had learned as being part of that very successful WIFE staff.
We had a consistent diet of the good guys over at WIFE. As a matter of fact, they did play black music, but it was the top 40 format, as one can recognize or one could remember. And it was really great, but this was just unbelievable to get that consistent diet and then get it 24/7. Oh, it was absolutely amazing.
WTLC's sign-on in 1968 was the beginning of the erosion for the audience at WIFE. That continued into the 70s on many other stations.
Eventually, WNDE went on with the top 40 format. They had been WFBM, an AC format.
Well, WNDE came to market with a group of very talented people, a very large collection of music, and a very good, tight format.
WNDE on 1260 and WIFE on 1310. So the two radio stations are practically hugging each other on the dial.
These two radio stations played pretty much the same thing, so it was all in the presentation and the signal in some cases, because WIFE had a terrible signal at night, whereas Windy was a little bit better.
If you want to hit, all you got to do is just put your finger in the hole right now, down at 239 10 20, and I'm going to get your song on for you. I just got one from East Indianapolis. Is there an East Indianapolis in this place? I don't know. Give me a call, let me know. Here they come, Julie Brothers.
Super Shark Superstar. Build Shark Super Shark. WXLW.
5:39, 21 minutes before 6 o'clock at WXLW. How are your coconuts today, huh?
Bill Shirk was very, very interesting when he took over WXLW. Many people wondered, is he going to make it? Well, as gutsy as he is and was, he was going to make it.
I would say Bill Shirk, the best way I could describe him is he's almost a Carney type. He's all about the promotion and the flash and the whatever.
Probably the biggest promotion I ever did was when the second month that I had Super XL on the air. In the morning, at 6 o'clock when we signed on, I had a basketball bouncing. And it just bounced and bounced, and then this Gary Gears, the voice talent, would have this just really evil laugh, and he'd say, WXLW as balls. We got tremendous results on that, and then what we did was, WXLW has balls, what's wrong? We're giving away Pacer basketballs.
WXLW signal, it was a daytime station, so they had to go off the air, at sundown, and they couldn't come on until sun up.
For a daytime-only station, WXLW did very well.
It's a war of money. The war is the money. Who gets the money? Our war was to get more people listening to our radio station than listen to theirs. My job was to first fix WNAP. It had already evolved into a very esoteric, mostly album-oriented radio station. My job was to bring it back to the longer versions of hits. There's no ratings waiting in deep cuts.
Well, WNAP was probably one of the most listened to radio stations for about 5 years. Stouffer's, which was right across the alleyway from the two-story brick at 28th and Illinois, would get constant barrages of program directors coming through listening to what we were doing because nobody understood us and they had to sit there and listen. The fact is you couldn't really figure out WNAP in one day. You had to listen for at least a week, maybe 2 weeks. And then it would start to sink in. Well, these guys, okay, all right, now we got it.
I think WNAP and the gang that was together from the very beginning through the early days of that radio station created a new kind of radio for America.
The buzzard came about because we didn't really have an image yet that we had defined at the radio station, something that you could really hang your hat on that was promotable. And there was a poster around at the time of two vultures sitting on a limb, one saying to the other, "Patience my blank, I'm going to kill something."
And we thought that was that's what we were about. Our mission was to knock off wife. And it's like, let's take it to the next level. Let's make that our mascot. Let's make that our representative. That's the most repulsive. The establishment will hate that image. They will absolutely hate it.
And we went for it. We didn't know exactly what we were going to do, but we decided we weren't going to be called the Vulture, but the Buzzard had kind of a good name.
Now, what could be more fun than a buzzard? The Wrath of the Buzzard. How can you beat that?
The buzzard was a logo with a pennant hanging out of its mouth, and you could see the F and the E on the pennant, which was to indicate that the buzzard had eaten its competition, WIFE.
Now, the Wrath of the Buzzard ID was the voice of my brother, Chuck Riley. He went into a recording session with George Johns and Chris Connor.
The Wrath of the Buzzard.
Getting there. You might be very close.
The Wrath of the Buzzard. You can always have them turn the volume up,
I like that delivery. I like that. You mean that approach.
The Wrath of the Buzzard. The Wrath of the Buzzard. Gotta be one of those. They all sound alike to me.
And the tape landed in my production bin at the radio station. I always had all these commercials. I was always the big voice kid that could do all these commercials. So they said, "Why don't you mix these out for us?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to. I love doing stuff in the production room."
The Wrath of the Buzzard. WNAP, Indianapolis.
And when you laid it over a hard rock and roll record, you couldn't miss it. It was hard to bury it.
The Wrath of the buzzard. WNAP, Indianapolis.
The first time I played that ID and I heard it go through my headphones, it was like the voice of God and a thunderbolt coming down and striking you, and the being in stereo, where it like almost, you know, it's like, oh my God, something is going through my head. What is it? And it was like I'd never heard anything like it before in my life.
It was another in-your-face restatement of the buzzard and our lack of respect for conventionality, if you will.
Stereo 93, WNAP.
Hugh Heller was a guy from Hollywood who was contacted by Jim Hilliard, who knew him personally, and he said, Hugh, we have this little FM station here, and we want to do something really creative. He said, you mean I can have some fun? We used those for, good Lord, 7 or 8 years on the air. And to this day, I don't think I played all the jingles. There were so many of them.
The brand new old-time flying machine. Step on a wing, swinging in the cockpit.
My favorite was Mumbles, which I think was an old blues guy going, and it went on for 48 seconds. And then at the end he went, WNAP. That's all it was. It was my favorite one.
WNAP, Stereo 93. With a P and an A and an N and a W, you know it's stereo logo 93. WNAP.
And I liked Clubita. Clubita was a 6-second jingle. It just went, Clubita, da-da-da, WNAP.
Clubita, WNAP.
What the hell does that mean? It worked perfectly with our station, because you could play the dumbest record before it, some Gilbert O'Sullivan hit or something from '73, into some cool album track, and nobody cared anymore. You made that song cool all of a sudden with this really weird jingle. And there was a third jingle that I used a lot. You have to listen carefully. It was a half second long. It just went, one up. That's WNAP pronounced.
H2SO4. It's got a real kick to it, but stereo 93 is safer, yeah.
H2SO4. If you sit there with headphones on and you play these for 2 or 3 years, they're all burned into your consciousness. There were times that I used to hear them in my dreams. I mean, I'd be having a dream that was totally something else, and I'd hear the jingle would play. You know, like the music of your life, you know?
Here's for fun, WNAP.
The Hugh Heller thing, it's all intimidation. It's all to make somebody else veer off of their path. You know, you hear those Heller jingles and yours sound pretty lame.
We had the WNAP raft race, the greatest promotion ever created. That wasn't a contest. You didn't win anything. I think we made a prize. What was the prize? I think we gave something for the best float or something. It didn't make any difference. It's a promotion. It's a life event.
The raft race fit into the strategy because it got on TV.
What a crowd, hey? Are we having fun?
And when you have a radio station and you're on TV and on the news, and you know, TV time's expensive, we were spending our money on other things.
We started out our first year, we had 150 rafts. We didn't know what we were going to do. The second year we did it, we had over 400 rafts. And the concert was the deal. You partied all day down the river, and then you got out at the park and you had an all-day concert going on.
WNAP, Stereo 93, Indianapolis.
We had all these live rock albums to choose from. There were just lots of concert albums. And we thought, well, let's just get on and do a special, and we'll play nothing but those cuts with the live sound. And we'll create Fantasy Park was what we called it, in Indianapolis. We added a live PA speaker system inside the studio that would be on when the microphone was on and not muted, so you could even turn it up a little bit and get feedback, and it sounded just like you were there. And we had it all choreographed. We had the location where we were, which was a gray area. We are on the north side of Indianapolis. Don't try to come out. The park is loaded, and you can't get in. You can just hear it on the radio. Sorry, we had to put this together so fast we couldn't really promote it. It was so wild that we had people coming and calling from Chicago. Their friends here had called them and said, there's a concert going on down here. We got to find out where it is and get out there. The police department came to the station several times saying, we got problems here. People are bugging us about this concert.
And we were on every 15 minutes saying it's a figment of your imagination and all. I mean, Janis Joplin's dead, but somehow she's live on our stage, you know, so people wanted it to be true.
UFO at WNAP tonight on the 25th hour. Randy, Tunes, Taylor, midnight.
25th hour. There's another thing. There were no commercials, and it was like put on an album and track the whole thing all the way through. No interruption, no talk, and we would get 2 copies of it from the record promotion guy or whoever, so you could play one side, and then you could say, you know, this is WNAP Indianapolis. Start the second side.
All we talked about was what was coming up tonight on the 25th hour. So our talk was about the album groups. We played the hits. And so we presented the Allman Brothers, but we only played their hit. Other than the 25th hour, we played their whole album. Sorry, hey, we're taking you all the way through the Allman Brothers tonight, baby. Yeah, be there. I just did it so we could talk hip all day. I mean, who cared if anybody listened at midnight?
In order to just do anything that wife wouldn't do, we would publicize speed traps.
WNAP 740, we have radar working 38th between Sherman and Emerson, northeast. Look out, baby.
FM was strong, and AM was fading, and WIFE was an AM station.
WIFE FM, when they first came on, they were beautiful music. And I think they were at 107.9, and I could be wrong about that, but they played stereo, beautiful music. But they didn't have much of a listenership. It was not very popular.
At NAP, we really expected WIFE to change its FM station, which was easy listening, to a top 40 format and come after us. They had a great signal, but they never did.
Now, Don Burden was always concerned about competition. He was aware of everything that went on in the market. So he was definitely understood that NAP was rolling and that they were on the move. And to counteract that, he would make some changes in the programming and so forth, and the activity, the promotion.
We had the bosses right there. I mean, I could walk into an office with an idea and go, Jim, guess what? And he goes, what? And I go, oh, we got to do that, man. I mean, that's how fast. See, they couldn't do that at WIFE. You know, they'd have to call Don Burden, who was in wherever the heck he lived, and then a lawyer would. Well, by the time they did all that, it was too late.
More than half of every dollar spent in advertising was going to those 2 stations, us and WIBC. Yeah, that's unheard of at any time.
For the first time in WIFE's history in Indianapolis, they had a competitor. For the first time, there was a station that, over a period of time, began to outrate them, and they were no longer the #1 station in town.
Well, you got a bunch of old-fashioned sounding, you know, hey, everybody, and then we got these characters who almost sound like they're going to swear any minute, right? You know, a bunch of dopers on the air. Oh, man, how could people complaining, you know, what, is he talking about drugs? No, of course not, right?
These poor old clowns are still banging away in oral. And their signal at night was so bad, I've heard high school PA systems that were better. A little cruel, isn't it? How are you going to fight with Buster Bodine in stereo? Good luck.
You know what I've always wanted? A beanie with a windshield wiper on it. 36 Buster Bodine been to the top
Buster Bodine was a hippie truck driver. I envisioned him as some blue-collar guy that wasn't that bright, yet was bright enough to know certain things to make people think he was a little brighter than he was. And I mean, there was a whole thing constantly going on in my head about the character, and that's all it was to me, was just a character. It has nothing to do with me, and it's the furthest. I mean, I'm a very conservative family guy and children, the whole thing. But when I would go on the air and do this character, it's like zipping up a suit that said Buster Bodine on. I turned into that guy.
CMC, the Stereo Center.
I always thought CMC should have got an announcer with a list. CMC. Whatever. Be unique in it. 725, Buster Bodine. We're playing down the top 9 tonight, and we are working on number 5 now. Welcome back, BG. This is John talking.
Chris Connor was the heart of that radio station. He was the guy that said, this is hip, this is not hip. Well, this is not that bad. We're going to make it hip. He was that good.
Chris Connor helping you break your leads. Turn it up, Jack, especially the bass. From the brand new Alice Cooper Muscle of Love. More widows than you're prepared to handle here today.
Chris had a tremendous influence over this station. I mean, Chris had a mind that recognized, like, Buster Bodine and Magic Mitch. He recognized everybody's strengths, and he let you go with it.
Guy's a genius. Guy is the hippest guy to this day. He's more alive, more alert of the world. He is more tuned in, if you will, than most anybody you'll ever bump into.
Chris's voice was an acquired taste.
WNAP, I know it. Ain't it the truth? Everywhere you go these days, somebody wants to give you a haircut. I get up someplace and say, hey, you, look, come here, I want to talk to you. Someone will turn around the other side and say, hey, you, come over here, I want to talk to you. Well, Moto don't want to give nobody a haircut. Not with music like this.
Just as Don Burton had experienced meteoric success in the mid-60s, in the 70s, when he fell and when Wife collapsed, Burton fell hard.
I think that the eventual downfall of WIFE was not being able to present an effective answer to the programming of WNAP.
I think by the time they figured out something was happening, it was too late. They were dead. They just didn't know it yet. It was a little harsh. Sure was fun, though.
And at the same time, the FCC was conducting their investigation about Wife radio and actually about star stations in terms of their license.
The people behind the scenes were double billing and giving prizes away to people on staff and doing other things that the Federal Communications System frowned upon.
Don Burton was notorious for some problems that he had with the contesting that he did on the stations. I remember that, I believe it was his mother won a refrigerator once. I know that several other relatives won televisions and other appliances.
Allegedly, WIFE had provided U.S. Senator Vance Hartke from Indiana several favors. Among them was slanting newscasts in Hartke's favor and even providing him with free airtime.
I believe because he was very arrogant, he was very cocky, he was very, it's about me and I'm right and full speed ahead. I personally believe he alienated somebody in Washington, whether it was the FCC itself, whether it was the commissioner of the FCC, whomever it was, and I think from that, they made sure that he would never run a radio station or own a radio station thereafter.
Ultimately, Don Burton lost all of his stations. On May 31st, 1976, WIFE ownership changed hands, and Burton was out of the radio business.
I think maybe they hung a man for stealing a chicken. I'm not telling you that he didn't probably have some improprieties and maybe didn't make some big mistakes, but I don't think it was anything, in my personal opinion, that warranted losing all of his licenses.
My first job on the air was at WIFE.
The Sheriff's Department was on their way to northbound 65.
I came late to that party. That was, they were still a top 40 station at the time, but doing not well at all. It was AM. It was the last days of AM radio here in town, I think, other than WIBC.
13-wife WIFE. McGuire in the morning at 8:06. Ann Craig will be here in just a moment with a look at the traffic. A lot of people call wanting to know what Ann looks like. Actually, she's not really that great looking, folks. She went streaking on the beach in Florida last summer, and a dog tried to bury her.
And as I understood the story, I think the owners and the general manager actually dipped into their own pocket to keep payroll at times. It was that bad. I think everybody knew that the future was on FM, and everybody was abandoning, certainly musically, the AM dial.
The station limped along, tried different formats, but eventually the WIFE call letters were changed, and it was gone.
The radio market was growing. There were other options. WFBQ was starting to be a big factor in terms of what was going on in the market. FM had really started to explode.
ZPL came in and did a top 40 format on FM.
WNAP was very few yesterday, other than some Beatles and Cream and stuff like that. But it was mostly today.
In the mid-70s, NAP even added some disco to its music rotation.
And that was my fault. I've taken a lot of heat for that over the years, but I wanted to reflect what was going on out there.
They tried to be all things to all people at one point, and that never works. The audience gets tired of the seesawing back and forth. They want what they want. They could find, and they were finding other alternatives to WNAP at the time.
You can't make that many changes when you start messing with something. People then go away, and it's real hard to get them back.
When WENS, a light rock station, came into the market, NAP retooled its playlist.
Tomorrow, I'm playing golf with the governor.
I love you, that's
Let's
for
do
real.
up another tasty cut.
I partied so hard last
Hey,
night.
doesn't it seem like most radio stations talk at you? We're different. We're the new WENS FM 97.
WNS absolutely killed WNAP dead. And I know that because in all the years until we bought it, it never recovered, and there are people who tell you that it never did recover in all those years. And we've owned it for 10 years, and it still never regained the position that it had.
WNAP was all about the people. And once you got rid of the people, you got rid of WNAP. And they brought in different people, different vibe, different program director, and it never was the same.
They lost their soul. They abandoned rock and roll.
The legacy of WIFE is this was a dynamic radio station. It was fun, it was contesting, it was promotional, very involved with the community. It was the complete ideal radio station.
When we came to build the building here, we thought about the WIFE window in the world. We also thought about the WIBC reader board on Illinois Street. I'll never forget as a little kid, you drive up Illinois Street and you see the headlines of the day brought to you by WIBC News. So both of those things we thought were great. We thought having the on-air studios on the circle with the reader board where people could walk by and see the headlines of the day just sort of went back to an earlier time.
WNAP changed Indianapolis in a lot of ways. I think it opened a lot of minds to infinite number of possibilities in the world. WNAP had almost a magical ingredient called imagination. And very few radio stations, it's not an essential element to being successful as a radio station.
I'm not sure that local radio is going to be able to compete with iPods and satellite radio and that sort of thing with the generation that is coming up.
One of the questions people ask me is, will there ever be another WNAP or another Radio Wars with Wife and WNAP type battles going on. I don't think so, mainly because we're in a new age of social media. And people can get their music, they can get their entertainment, they can get their information so quickly from so many different sources. What the future holds, I hope I'm around to see, because there may be little mini skirmishes, but I'm not sure there will be something that we knew as radio wars.
Too many teardrops for one heart to carry on.